I never miss a shot. Let me take the shot.
Destroyed a tower!
It's all skill. It's over. This
First blood!
is unexpected. Minna ho nataparan ivobanen. Target. It's over.
You have been defeated.
Shunizu Gavauhor. I never miss a shot.